Copy 724, roger. Center maintain 2000.
Center maintain 2000, subject 1.
Yeah, it's been a couple weeks. Hi, I'm working on a co-op roguelike first-person shooter, and today I wanted to explore the handful of things that are starting to make the game come together and feel fun, dare I say. Before I begin, I'm just gonna ask everyone to join the Discord server for the game if you're interested. Please do that. Yeah, thanks. Anyways, the majority of the time since the last devlog has been spent working on an enemy system. I ended up deciding against rendering enemies on the client side only, actually, because first of all, it's just hard to do, and with the amount of moving hitboxes and such, it's just going to make the game end up feeling clunky. Secondly, I'm not actually entirely sure it would improve the optimization that much. It's not a tower defense game, so first of all, so much more data has to be stored for enemies to feel responsive, but also, we're not running that many enemies at once. Maybe the absolute maximum of enemies we'll have is like 40-ish at once, which is like fine for the game or like your client and the server to like render if we optimize their behaviors. So every game tick, we have these enemy data stored in like a table. We're gonna update one enemy's behavior through a loop. This kind of system ensures that enemy behavior is still snappy and engaging, but the game never puts too much stress on the server at the same time. I then went about actually making the enemies actually act as enemies. The first part of this was to construct a vision cone around an enemy. Obviously, if they see you and you're close enough to be spotted by them, they'll move right to you until they're in range to start using their attacks. Well, that's not a really engaging or intelligent of an enemy system alone, and it's very abusable and easy to fight. So the next addition was suspicion. If an enemy got shot or sees the player, they will become suspicious and have a wider and further range of vision. Why does it matter if they're just going to target you? Well, suspicious enemies will also make nearby enemies suspicious of you. Enemies will also become suspicious if another enemy dies near them. I then made it so that if you shoot an enemy, they will move to where you shot them in order to check it out. Although they won't necessarily know where you were and will not aggro onto you until they actually see you. If an enemy actually does aggro onto you, however, they will tell nearby enemies to move to your position, although those enemies also won't aggro onto you until they see you themselves. With these systems in place, there's some dynamic enemy behaviors that will allow for some pseudo-stealth gameplay, including hiding from the enemies, luring them away to like pick them off one by one, etc. Yeah, it's still incredibly easy to alert enemies and engage fights because obviously it's not really a stealth kind of game. Next, I had to make enemies feel as though they were actually doing something in the world. Thus, some enemies will be stationary and some will move around key objectives and outposts, requiring you to initiate fights, and others will act as though they are just out on patrol or to hunt the player, periodically receiving the player position and moving to that position, and upon reaching that position, it will wander around that position to like search for the player before they receive an updated position or they just spot you and start fighting. I then threw in a ranged enemy to actually shoot at you. You can dodge their bullets by outright dodging their bullets because the bullets are just really slow right now, so you can just move to the side. There's also like a maximum speed they can actually turn around at, so you can kind of run circles around them to dodge the bullets. And there's also some spread to the weapon. There's like a few degrees of spread. But this will change as the difficulty does get ramped up in later layers and difficulties. Eventually, I plan on adding enemies that are able to call in reinforcements, making it so that as you fight more and more enemies, the enemies will escalate, sending in stronger troops more often, and updating your position more often, and eventually your position will just be broadcast for all enemies constantly to be able to find you. However, that like really needs to wait until we have like a viable map, and some of that also just needs to wait for more enemies to exist simultaneously, so it'll take a while, but it'll come soon enough. With some enemies to actually fight, I went about making enemies a bit more enjoyable to fight. The first thing I added was some effects upon hitting the enemy. If your gun can't penetrate enemy defensive stats well, then they'll kind of just spark off the enemy's body part. If your weapon does do a decent bit of damage above their defensive stats, then it calls a little splurge of blood. I then added a spark effect to parrying and blocking hits, and then I added the ability to actually parry bullets, which is actually really cool and satisfying to do. There's also a myriad of minor changes, mostly to the UI and to the HUD, and some additional special effects, such as like the muzzle smoke and such. The biggest change I actually had to make the game more enjoyable that wasn't already covered by the behavior of the enemies was, again, inspired by Helldivers 2. What I did here was I gave each enemy body part its own defense and resistance stats. There were some annoying bugs that made limbs not work, and apparently renaming the limbs to something else completely breaks Roblox humanoids. I don't know why. But eventually it got fixed. This system allowed me to award players for hitting specific spots on enemies, and certain enemies will have enjoyable counterplay that will feel rewarding to engage with and kind of punish the player for not utilizing it. The last and most fun thing I think I added this time around was the abilities. The player's chosen character will have 2 abilities assigned to them, although one won't be available off the bat, and 3 additional slots to choose additional abilities that they can pick up from the map. Abilities will include anything from small utility devices to airstrikes to magic-based abilities through the theurgy system we previously mentioned in the last video. Now they're not quite done yet. They don't actually have like a cooldown or consume your mana or show up on like the HUD, but you can equip them, and there's like 2 functional and fun abilities you can mess around with. The first of which being a nice little device that you can activate to highlight enemies for a couple seconds, and the second of which being calling in a missile strike to blow a bunch of enemies to smithereens. Anyways, that's all for this time. Again, subscribe and join the Discord if you're really interested. It only gets better from here. Thanks for tuning in and checking out my project. I put a ton of work into what I do, and well, like, I don't get paid for this, so I'm kind of happy that my last video gets performed decently well. Anyways, see you next time.